Welcome to the Creators Podcast. I'm Jonathan Hamill, a doctor and writer based in Paris. Today, my guest is Maeve DuVally. Maeve, born Michael DuVally, is a consultant for corporations and other entities on communication strategy and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She also spends time mentoring transgender people and is a frequent speaker on LGBTQ workplace issues. For over 18 years, Maeve worked at Goldman Sachs, where she held the position of managing director in corporate communications. In 2019, a journalist from the New York Times followed her at work for her first day as Maeve after years of coming to work as Michael. Maeve was suddenly in the spotlight, and her life was changed forever. Before joining Goldman Sachs, Maeve worked in media relations at Merrill Lynch, and prior to that, she was a financial journalist and editor at Bridge News, working in places as diverse as Tokyo, Washington, D.C., and finally, New York City. She spent 10 years in Japan and holds a special bond with that country, which I hope we will explore in a few minutes. Maeve serves on the boards of GLAAD, that's Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, the Night Big Hot Fellowship, a journalism nonprofit, Connecticut-based LGBTQ health provider, Anchor Health Initiative, and Trans New York. She earned a BA in English from Providence College in 1983 and was a Knight Bagehot Fellow at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism in 1994. Her new book, Maeve Rising, published by Sibylline Press, will be available on August 15th. You can find her on Instagram at Becoming Maeve. Maeve, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan. I'm excited to talk about my book.
Let's do it. Okay, so I want to talk first about your relationship with Japan. Can you tell us what brought you to Japan in the first place and just tell you how old you were and what you were doing?
Sure. I first went to Japan for my junior year in college. I I basically wanted to go about as far away as I could go from the East Coast of the United States. And fortunately, my school had a exchange student program with a university in Osaka, Japan. So I did that, and I got away from New England. I got away from my family, and I really didn't know what to expect. But during that year, I grew to love the country.
Hmm. And you talk about it a little bit in the book, but how did the fact that you were liked in Japan, kind of because you were a foreigner, because you were different from Japanese people, obviously, how did that play in decision to go and also to keep coming back to Japan over the years? Because you did go back to the U.S., but back and forth a few times.
Sure. I'm going to talk about acceptance here, and I'll probably talk about acceptance again in the context of me being an out transgender person. But, um, I was not, uh, I didn't really like myself for most of my life. And as a matter of fact, I hated myself for most of my life. And I feared rejection from people. And so from one perspective, Japan was perfect for me because I was accepted because I was a foreigner from the United States. I was not for who I am individually, and that worked really well for me. And then the other side of that is a foreigner is never really truly accepted into Japanese society in the same way a Japanese person is. So I could never be truly accepted, so I didn't have to worry about being accepted. So it's a little bit strange, but that dynamic worked exceedingly well for me.
You were able to stay a little bit in the middle, in the blurry
Almost,
lines.
it almost felt like when I think about it now, it I went about my life and I worked and I had friends, but it almost felt like it was easier to hide there than it was in the United States.
Hmm. And in your book, you also you write that spiritual economics rule the universe. And you mention some spirituality in Japan in the book. In what capacity did your time in Japan influence your spirituality? Because I think you grew up in a Christian household.
Yeah, I grew up in a large Irish Catholic family on the East Coast of the United States, which is in the Northeast. Large Irish Catholic family is very, very common. And I was devout Catholic when I was growing up, but it turns out that that faith and what was being taught at the time, with an emphasis on sin and hell, it really didn't work very well for me. It didn't really make me feel good about myself. So I got rid of that, but I consider myself a spiritual person, and I've been searching for a spirituality that works for me for most of my life. And so I've tried different things through the years. And in Japan, there's two religions. There's Shintoism, which is a native religion that's generally pantheistic, that the spirit, God is in everything. And there's Buddhism, which was imported from China. And I found Shintoism very, very appealing with the whole idea that God, the spirit, just permeates everything around us, particularly nature. So I took that from Japan.
Hmm. And was it an active search, or it was just what you were in contact with every day, or what did you actually learn it over there? Was go to classes, or was it just so?
Yes, I learned about Shintoism when I was an exchange student.
Hmm. And something that still in your life today?
Yes. To this day, I love going wandering in the woods in Japan and discovering like a lot of Shinto shrines. They'll have them in the cities, but you'll find these places in the woods in this remote place. You'll suddenly find a Shinto shrine, and I love stumbling across them when I'm hiking in the woods or the mountains or something.
Sounds amazing. So the book goes back and forth between your transformation into Maeve and your earlier years. Actually, it starts with you as a sober Michael realizing he wants to wear lipstick. So when you look back at this now, a few years later, when do you think you first realized you wanted to wear lipstick, even if unconsciously?
So one of the themes in the book is that my time in Japan, which was essentially the 1980s, which corresponded to my 20s, what was a time of experimentation for me, appearance experimentation, sexual experimentation, and I think that's the closest I ever came to realizing that I was transgender consciously back then. I wore a lot of makeup, different types of androgynous clothing, and I believe that myself as Maeve kind of bubbled to the surface there, but it couldn't quite get out. And then when I went back to the United States, it was buried again, and only to come out very recently in 2018.
Why do you think that is, that it almost came out over there, but you weren't ready to accept it, or you
Yeah,
didn't see
I,
it?
I think I was somewhat open to it, but we're going to talk about the fact that I was an active alcoholic for most of my life. I think alcohol prevented me from getting in touch with myself, and actually perhaps that on some level was some reason why I drank, because I didn't want to discover this part of me.
Hmm. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about alcohol. So you write in the book, quite honestly, that you had a drinking problem for most of your adult life, and you were in and out of the AA a few times before finally getting sober in January of 2018. Um, Again, in retrospect, what do you think was key in making you sober for good?
I think the most important thing, and we talked about this already, was I discovered spirituality in a big way. And that spirituality is what was lacking in my previous recoveries, and which I rely upon now. And the reliance upon that is what keeps me sober.
So it's the mixture of maybe time and spirituality, and finally
Yep.
accepting. Yeah,
Yep.
interesting. Now you are actually mentoring people to stay sober. Is that correct?
Yes. We call them
Yes.
sponsor. I'm a sponsor, and they're sponsees. Yes.
Yes. So that how important is that to stay connected to the AA community? You think that's something that will just continue over the years?
Oh, it's extremely important, and I can answer that on many levels. The other thing that was really lacking all my life was a connection to other people. I talked earlier about being fearful of other people, being worried about being rejected. So the easiest way not to be rejected is to avoid people. And over the course of my long drinking career, all the friends that I had earlier in life. They just kind of peeled away from me, and I didn't do anything to try and retain them. So I really lost contact with people. And in the end, although I was married and although I had children, I spent, most of my life alone in my head, even when I was around other people. So once I got into AA in a big way, I learned the importance of connecting with other people, and and that's really one way that I stay sober. The other way, there's two other important things about my recovery. Is I go to meetings pretty much every day. I feel I have to. Um, what I do to stay sober every day is the most important thing I do, because without that, there's no me. I'd either be dead or a miserable person, one of the two. So that's really important. And then I consider my sobriety a gift, and a lot of people helped me early in my sobriety. And we believe in recovery that in order to keep the gift of sobriety, you have to give it away to other people, because when you're helping another person, you're not only helping another person, you're also thinking about that person's well-being, and you're not thinking about your petty problems. So it really helps you to help other people. So
For sure,
I
yeah.
hope that answers your question.
Oh yeah, totally. And when you go to these meetings every day, is it just the act of going, or do you always speak, or is it just to be also there if someone wants to talk to you, or be part of the community?
Um,
Do I mean
yeah,
do you sometimes just go and not I don't I've never been, but I
sure,
suppose
sure.
like people
So
take turns talking.
I I'll every time I go to a meeting, I'll talk to somebody before the meeting or after the meeting, and I'll often share during the meeting, though I don't do it every time. The important thing is to listen, and the secret sauce of 12-step programs is the whole idea of identification. And identification is not something that's just particular to AA. It's how all good storytelling works. So for my book, I hope people identify with my book, and it helps them in their life. So in recovery, all we can do is tell our story and hope that it resonates with people, hope that people identify with it. And if they do, they might take something away from it and apply it to their own lives. And that's how storytelling works. And I hope my book in some way inspires people, and people are able to take something away from it, and it helps them lead a happier, more fulfilling life.
Yeah, we'll come back to the book a little later, but first I wanted to talk about the New York Times article. I was You talk about it a little bit in the book, but so it was 2018, right? And
By
so you had a
2019, actually.
journalist follow
2019. Yep.
2019, sorry.
Yep.
So you had a journalist from the New York Times follow you around for your first day at Goldman Sachs as Maeve. I was wondering how you decided to contact the journalist. I think her name was Emily Flitter.
Yeah.
Was that conscious, or was just something that happened, or did you think about it and decide that you wanted a journalist with you? Because you could also have just gone about your day
Yeah.
without having a journalist.
Yep.
How did that
Yeah.
come about?
So it actually just came about. At that stage in my life, I probably wasn't very comfortable talking about myself publicly. And what happened was, when I went to the Human Resources Department of Goldman Sachs and told them in April of 2019 that I wanted to come out, we drew up a list of people internally and externally, who we needed to tell ahead of time that I was going to be coming out. And we needed to do that because my name was going to change, my appearance was going to change, and it's just kind of good business to let people know that there was going to be a big change in my life. The most important external constituency that I deal with is reporters. So there's a group of a dozen or so reporters who I probably talk to almost every single day. I consider some of them friends, and we decided that we needed to tell those reporters ahead of time that I was going to change. And we knew that it was a possibility, journalists being journalists, that one of them might think my coming out was something worth writing about. And it turns out Emily Flitter at the New York Times was that person. And she decided to do a feature on me coming out. But I did not initiate that in any way. And I'll tell you that that story really, in many ways, altered the course of my life. And we can get into that if you'd like.
Sure, yeah, because the response I think was amazing. You got, I think, many letters or emails of people came to see you. Can you tell us a little bit the day after looked like?
Sure. The day of, I'll tell you, I got 300 or 400 emails from people, mostly at
Wow.
Goldman Sachs, congratulating me and offering their encouragement and support. I got emails also from external people as well, and who I knew, and then I got emails from people I didn't know. And one subset of that was emails from transgender people in various stages of coming out, many of them in corporate America or in school, but worried about interviewing as an out transgender person for a corporate job. And that whole experience taught me that the experience that I had in AA of sharing my story with other people and having that help them, that I could do that outside of AA to people in the LGBTQ plus community, and I've tried to continue to do that.
So that was really the big change, that article. And then because you maybe you hadn't thought about that before because you were also very nervous probably about your first day. But,
Yeah,
so I guess that all changed afterwards.
exactly. And I loved my job at Goldman Sachs. I had a great career there. I worked there 18 years. But at this stage of my life, I want to do more to give back to the LGBTQ plus community. And we really need it now because our community is under siege in the United States and many countries around the world. And I come from a place of privilege. I'm white. I live in New York City. I don't really have too many economic worries at the moment. So there's a lot I can do to share my experience and help other people. And I spend a lot of my time trying to do that.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the support because I feel like you had a lot of support from your colleagues and from other people after the New York Times article. But I was thinking also about Japan, about your experience in New York City at the very beginning when you where you would go out shopping for women's clothes as Michael. It seemed like clerks in stores were always very nice to you, and you read about this woman also making some comment on the subway, telling you she admired the way you were moving through space. So it comes also to Japan and the comfort of strangers. I was thinking how that might have helped you a lot in the beginning to accept your transformation.
Yeah, there's a lot that you said there. So there's various ways I can go with this, but I think one thing I would say is that as I started to change my appearance, people started acting differently towards me. And again, I'm privileged because I live in New York, and this is a very accepting place, and people generally are comfortable and know transgender people, so they're comfortable being around them. But one thing I don't know is why people um, reacted differently for me. And the reason I say I don't know that is because the first variable is my appearance changed, right? So I wasn't part of the kind of dominant white cisgender heterosexual male group that I identified with before. And so definitely for some people in underrepresented groups, um, they were more comfortable approaching me than they had been before. But the other variable here is as I got sober and as I began to explore my gender identity, I became happier. So I like to say that I had a PhD in the ground when I was drinking. And what I mean by that is I spent my whole time looking down. Never looked anyone in the eye. And I was not a very inviting person. I was an unhappy person. So people sense that energy. And I like to think that I have a more positive, happy aura about me now. And I think people respond positively to positive auras. So I don't know how much of the way people reacted to me had to do with my appearance changing and how much had to do with the fact that my whole aura was different.
Right, and also, as you said, the fact that you were in New York City, because now that you're talking to and helping other transgender people, I guess across the USA, the experiences are probably very different in other states, in other cities, I
Oh,
imagine.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So all that's happened must have been kind of also hard to process for your children. I think you have three children, right?
Yes.
Um, how has your relationship with your children evolved in the past few years since you became Maeve?
Sure. My daughter, who's in her mid 30s right now, she accepted me right from the start, and she was very instrumental in helping me when I got sober this time around. It was very difficult for me the first couple of months, and she helped me quite a bit. So she was fine from the start. My oldest son, was a senior in high school at the time. He told me that once I graduate from high school and go to college, everything's cool. And so I waited a few months, and then everything was cool. And then I have a younger son who's just going to go to college right now, who is a teenager, and he's still getting used to me. But I'm very very fortunate because uh, both of my ex-wives and all three of my children accept me, and they treat me with respect and dignity. And not every transgender person is so fortunate. So I feel very blessed.
Yeah, and there was I think it's your daughter in the book who says, "Can I still call you dad?" Which I thought was kind of funny.
Yep. Yep.
So I was wondering what you think happened. I know it's probably like a deep question, but between January of 2018, when, well, you finally got sober, and 9 months later, when you realized that you were a trans woman, what happened during those 9 months that couldn't happen before? Was it all, as we said, because or thanks to the stopping of drinking plus the spirituality? Have you had time to reflect on that?
Yeah, I think it was recovery's not just about going to meetings. It's about working on yourself. It's about figuring out what made you tick. It's figuring out what your character defects are. It's acknowledging the wrongs that you did in your past, the ways that you hurt people, and um, really facing that honestly. And that is part of the program of recovery, and that's what I did between January and October of 2018, and I was towards the end of the 12 steps, which is the program of recovery,
Hmm.
when I realized I was transgender And in retrospect, I don't find that surprising at all.
Right. Because of what you said before, that the
Yep.
alcohol was
I,
kind
I
of
had done,
suppressing it.
I had done, I had gotten sober and I had done the work and I understood myself. I understood why I acted the way I did for most of my life. I had a better understanding of the person I was and the person I wanted to become. And I was ready.
And what can you tell us about the work you did with Lisa Douglas and the diversity and inclusion team at Goldman Sachs? When did you go to them? At what stage of uh, your transformation?
Sure. So I realized I was transgender in October of 2018. And January of 2019, I went to our human resources department. I told them that I was transgender, I needed a therapist, I needed some doctors, and I was telling them, but I didn't want them to tell anybody within the company. So they helped me get my therapist, they helped me get my doctor, and I began hormone replacement therapy. And for 6 or 7 months, there was a lag between me being out in my social life and me being out at work. And I talk about it in detail in the book, but I had this kind of crazy routine where, I'd wear a suit all day. And then at the end of the day, I would do some of my transformation on my floor in the bathroom on my floor. And then I would go to another bathroom on the first floor of the building and kind of put the final touches on my appearance. And then I'd walk out of the building. And that worked for me and seemed pretty exciting initially. But by the end of those 7 months, I was very tired of that routine. And in April of 2019, Goldman Sachs held a panel about proper use of pronouns for transgender people and how to make the workplace more welcoming for transgender people. And there were three very confident, happy transgender people on the stage. And I decided I wanted to come out. So I went back to Lisa Douglas and Human Resources at Goldman Sachs and told her I wanted to come out. And we came up with a plan that would let me come out in 6 weeks' time. And we listed all the things that needed to be done. And she helped me accomplish those things. And, part of it was informing people internally and externally, like we talked
Mm.
about
Yes.
earlier. Part of it was um, fixing some of the technical issues that needed to be fixed. My name was going to change within our system. And she helped me quite a bit. She was my relationship manager. Whenever something came up that was a problem, she helped me solve it. And I think that was probably the best thing that Goldman Sachs did, assigning a person in human resources to me to help me every step of the way with my coming out experience.
Yes, because I read the New York Times article, and it says that Goldman Sachs expanded its employee medical plan to cover gender reassignment surgery and hormone therapy as early as 2007, which I didn't know, obviously. Um, how does that speak about the openness of your former workplace? Because I'm betting it's not the same in many other workplaces.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, in my last year at Goldman Sachs, many of the trans employees and allies of trans employees got together and we did a study where we benchmarked what Goldman Sachs covers with what other companies covered. And we found that some companies had better coverage than Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs covered a lot of the main things, but there's a lot of other things if you think about it. There's fertility. There's also fertility for the children of employees. There's something called, some people get facial surgery. There's hair removal. There's voice modification. And so we went to Goldman Sachs and said, hey, we think these things should be covered. And Goldman Sachs expanded its coverage
Wow.
last year for many things. And that sends a powerful message to both employees and people outside the company that Goldman Sachs supports its transgender colleagues. And, I think the financial services industry, big banks in the financial services industry, talk about diversity a lot. I think they do want to attract and retain a diverse population of people. I think other industries, like, for example, technology, entertainment, they're very supportive of transgender employees. Some of the other industries are not so um, are not so supportive, and it's difficult for smaller companies too. They they don't have as much resource, and they don't have as much experience dealing with transgender people. So size, industry,
Mm,
what state they're based in, those all are factors that determine how supportive companies are going to be of their populations.
for sure. Wanted to talk a little bit about the medical side of your transformation. You said you started hormone therapy, I think, relatively quickly after you met with Lisa Douglas. What can you tell us about the different effects that the hormone therapy had on you, not only physically, but also mentally or emotionally?
Um, yeah, when somebody like myself begins taking female hormones, yeah, there are definitely changes in the body, and for example, your breasts begin to grow. That's usually one of the quickest things that happens. But beyond those physical changes, I would tell you, I can't describe how, but I can just tell you that um, I felt different, and it just felt right. And it was a similar feeling to what I had when I began taking antidepressives after my alcoholic bottom in January of 2018. I now believe that I was depressed for much of my life, and I was self medicating with alcohol. So once I agreed to try antidepressives, that also contributed to this feeling of feeling more right. So that's what hormones did for me, and I continue to take hormones.
Yeah, what can you tell us about the medical team at the Mount Sinai Center for Transgender Medicine and Surgery?
Sure.
Um, yeah, can you tell us about the relationship with the doctors, the nurses?
Yeah, so my first point of contact was a endocrinologist, and endocrinologists are the ones that are uh, experts in hormones, right? So I first met with an endocrinologist, and then once I decided that I wanted to have surgeries, I actually had to, and I want to go into this a little bit because there's some
Sure.
misconception out there, and there are politicians all over the world peddling this nonsense that anybody can kind of walk off the street and get gender affirmation surgery or get something done to their breasts. Well, that's absolutely not true. Even as an adult, I had to wait a full year, and I had to live a full year as my true self before I could even have surgery. I had to be evaluated by a social worker. I had to be evaluated by my therapist. I had to be evaluated by an independent therapist before Mount Sinai would agree to have the surgery. And incidentally, that's true everywhere. You just cannot walk off the street and get these surgeries. There's
Sure.
a
Yeah.
lot of safeguards in place. And Mount Sinai happens to do more surgeries, and the main surgeries are um, for transgender females like myself: facial feminization surgery, breast augmentation, and gender affirmation surgery. So I actually had both gender affirmation surgery. and breast augmentation surgery in 2020. And incidentally, it's generally not a great idea to ask transgender people about their surgeries, but
Okay.
the purpose of this one of the purposes of this podcast is to educate. So I'm going to try and educate. So I got both of my surgeries done during the height of COVID, which was both good and bad. It was good because there's recovery times for both of those. And because it was during COVID, it kind of felt like the world was quieter and there was less going
Mm,
on. The bad side was when I was in the hospital, nobody could visit me. Um, so, um, so yeah, and so the care I got at Mount Sinai, I had a very talented uh, surgeon, Dr. Pang, who did both of my surgeries. And Mount Sinai has really talented surgeons who have a lot of experience with this, and they do wonderful work. That's life transforming for
mm,
transgender people.
yeah. So how was the recovery? Besides, I guess it was hard because you were lonely. But were you in the hospital for like a week or something with a lot of care, a lot of nurses coming see you, therapists if you needed one? How did that? Because it was the height of COVID. I'm actually surprised that they were having elective surgeries during COVID. Was that because here I think we most places we closed down some elective surgeries. How did that happen?
Yeah, so New York closed down. COVID kind of really captured everybody's imagination. I think it was the third week of March of 2020, and New
Yep.
York almost immediately shut down elective surgeries. And my surgery for gender affirmation surgery was scheduled for May of 2020, and so that got canceled. But elective surgeries started up again in June. And I fortunately was one of the first persons who was able to have this surgery in June when it started up again. Most hospitals won't keep you very long for anything, no matter how bad your surgery is. They try to move you out pretty quickly. So I think I was in probably for 3 nights, and then I went home and I came home with some equipment, and I was really for the first month on my back. I began to move around my second month, and I recovered pretty quickly. So by my third month, I was able to do pretty much everything that I do in my normal life, including running and swimming. So it was not too bad a recovery for me. But some people have complications. Um, it's a very detailed and intense surgery, and some people take quite a while to recover.
Yeah. Um, Before all these procedures were available, and in I guess some countries where they are not available, how do you think trans people deal with their feelings? Do you think it's a lot of personal misery could be averted if this surgery, these procedures were more readily accepted and available in all countries?
Uh, Absolutely, and physical appearance is a big part of gender dysphoria. And I can tell you, I didn't know consciously that I was transgender, but what I did know was I hated everything that was masculine about myself. And um, for roughly 4 decades, I didn't look at myself in the mirror. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. That's how strongly I detested my appearance. So surgeries are really important. However, this is another misconception that a lot of people have. They think the physical side of it is the most important, when in fact, for most of us, it's not. It's the internal piece that's more important. Obviously, dressing the way I do, having the appearance that I have, is very rewarding for me, but being accepted by a group of women as one of them is perhaps the most rewarding feeling that I can have. And I've had that experience many times since I've come out, and I never get tired of that feeling.
And is that is are both feelings, this feeling you just described and the feeling of hating yourself and not wanting to look at yourself in the mirror, something you also saw in other transgender people you've been talking to for the last few years?
Yes, a lot of us, a lot of us have issues with self-esteem, self-love, and it's because we just don't feel right in the bodies that we're in. And I just talked about acceptance, and I'll just go back to the comment I made at the outset about acceptance in Japan. And it's very related because I think for most of my life, I've wanted to be accepted, but I didn't really know what I wanted to be accepted as. And now I know I want to be accepted as a sober person, a transgender person, a woman, a lesbian, an LGBTQ plus person, a happy person, and someone who helps other people. So I found myself.
Yeah. Speaking of mistakes, we all make mistakes every day, but I was wondering if you look back now at something that at the time seemed like a terrible, the worst possible outcome, that now you realize was a blessing in disguise. What do you think of if I say this?
Yeah, that's actually pretty easy because I describe this in the book, but my last alcoholic bottom in January of 2018, I hold myself up in my apartment. I did not accept phone calls or texts for a week. I only left my apartment to get more alcohol, and I drank around the clock for a week. I would wake up, drink more, fall asleep, wake up, drink more, fall asleep. I did that for a week. And at the end of it, I tried to kill myself. Thankfully, it was a somewhat half hearted attempt, but you know, I made an attempt on my life.
Mm.
And in retrospect, um, I was one of those defiant alcoholics who needed to go to that place. So some people in their teenage years they get to their bottom really quickly after a couple of years, and they realize they have to stop. And some people stop when they're teenagers. I went on for 40 years, and it took an attempt on my life for me to realize that I wanted to live, that I wanted to stay sober, and I had to figure out my way forward. And we talk about that in recovery, that your bottom, which just seems horrible. It was a terrifying experience. I never want to go back to the place I was in at that time. But because I went to that place, um, on the continuum, that's where kind of my changed life started and led to where I am today. So without that experience, I don't believe I would be here today. So
Yep.
I hold on to that experience, though it fills me with terror. I always want to remember it because that will help me stay sober.
Great answer. So always remember it, but never go back.
Yep, yep.
I was wondering if you had any books or documentaries that have also helped you along the way, either, I guess, on the alcoholism side or on also the becoming Maeve side.
There's one documentary I watched, Disclosure. It was on Netflix. It was made several years ago. And Disclosure looks at some of the TV shows and movies that I grew up on that have people that were either transgender or seemed transgender, and some of the stereotypes that those shows shopped. And let me give you some examples. A lot of people have seen the movie Silence of the Lambs. So the serial killer in that movie dresses as a girl sometimes, and, and there are other examples of this. And the message is, when a man dresses as a girl, they become a serial killer. And
Right.
a lot of shows that I grew up on had those stereotypes that I wasn't even aware of. So that documentary was very eye opening to me, and I encourage everybody to watch that. And with recovery, most of my experience with recovery is face to face with other people. So I don't really have anything that I watched that was
Yeah.
particularly important to me.
Okay. So getting back to the book, it's called Maeve Rising. It'll be out in a week, actually. What compelled you to write this book in the first place? Did you feel like you had to give back to the community that it helped you become yourself? Is that where it all started?
That became an important element for me as I was writing the book. I talked about the power of storytelling, the power of identification. So I hope that this book allows people to take something away that will help them in their lives. And incidentally, not just transgender people, but I talk a lot about the process of self discovery and self actualization. That's what a transition is. But everybody is transitioning their whole lives. Everybody is trying to discover who they are and who the person they want to be is, and hopefully move towards that. So, in a sense, everybody's transitioning. So, I hope some of the things I say in the book are useful for other people. But I think the main impetus for me starting to write the book was 2018 was such a year of change for me. I got sober. I realized I was transgender. So I really felt the need to go back and examine my life now that I had a sober and transgender lens, to do that and see if I saw my life differently than I had up until that time. And the answer is I did. And I've tried to write a memoir several times in my life, but I clearly wasn't ready. I wasn't the person I needed to be to write the memoir, and I am now.
Mm. What did your writing routine look like? Because you have a background in journalism, obviously, so that I'm sure that helped you a lot. Uh, what was the timeline? How much time did it take to write the book? Because if you've never, if even if you're a journalist, you've never written a whole book. Did you force yourself to have a really regular routine, or did you have someone read the chapters as you went along?
It's interesting because I was a journalist and I consider myself a good writer. And incidentally, I've gotten a lot of feedback that the book is well written, and I'm very happy that people feel that way because I spent a lot of time on it. And it wasn't solid. It wasn't a solid 3 years, but it took me 3 years basically to produce the book. And I had I had basically a finished copy ready by the end of 2021, but I knew it needed some work, and I began working with a writing coach last year, and that really helped me um, know what I needed to do to get the book to really be a finished product, and and I did a major rewrite last year, and really finished it at the end of last year, and it's gone to be published.
Yeah, I'm curious because of how did you find the writing coach? Because I'm kind of in the middle of the same process. So how did you choose the writing coach? Did you already have an editor at the time, or how did that work? How did you
Yeah,
choose the
I
person
already had
who
an
you
editor.
knew?
I already had an editor, but there's a lot of writing workshops in New York City, and I, through word of mouth, found a couple of people who I really liked and really connected with, and then I just asked them to do some exclusive work with me, and they gave me a lot of good advice. I rearranged chapters, I rewrote chapters, and it really helped. And I think people in general would like to think they can kind of do things on their own. But when I think about it, this is the first time as you said, it's the first time I've written a book. How am I supposed to know how to do it? So
Exactly.
it was really nice to get help, and I think have a hard time asking for help. So it was really important for me to get help from other experts to get the book over the finish line.
For sure. Well, I thought it was really well written. I read it like very fast in the train, like in 2 or 3 days, also. So, well
Good.
done.
I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
Actually, the book finishes with your return to Japan. I think in 2022, and you hadn't been back to Japan since 1992. Um, so, how was it like going back to a place where, as you said, you might have had a glimpse into who you really were, but you were too young to fully see it or acknowledge it at the time? Did going back make you understand in the deeper sense what brought you there in the first place?
Yeah, it was really a spectacular trip. I was there for 3 weeks, and a lot of times, um, I'm not working full time anymore. I have a lot of different jobs that I do, so I had the luxury of going there for 3 weeks and spending time in the three places where I lived in Japan. And actually, one of the places I'm working on a novel already, so I did some research for a novel I'm working on, and which is going to be partly set in Japan. And I
Wow.
talked before about um, writing the book and seeing it from a sober and out transgender lens. But in going back to Japan, I feel like I connected my current self with a place that was very important to me in the past. And because Japan's the place really where I became a full blown alcoholic, where I became an everyday blackout binge drinker, which I was most of my life. And I wanted to go there sober. And
Mm.
so I, I did. I did. My experiences there were tremendous. I met a lot of friends who still live there, both Japanese and foreign friends. I met my first girlfriend, who lives there now, and um, yeah, Japan's changed a lot in 30 years in some ways. In some ways, it hasn't. And a lot of things I love about the country are still the same. And I hope that my work takes me there every year. I'm not sure I want to live there full time, but if I could go back for a month every year, that would be tremendous for me. And I think I do definitely have some type of spiritual connection to the country, and it's just been a huge part of my life.
Great. So, finally, do you have a message or something you would like to broadcast to the world in 1 or 2 sentences to finish this off? Tough question.
Don't suffer in silence, which is what I did for many years. So if you're suffering, tell somebody about it, whether it's family, friends, a medical health professional, a therapist, and get help because um, whatever you're experiencing, it's probably only temporary. And when we're experiencing these kind of negative, difficult feelings, we have the tendency to think that it's going to be that way for the rest of our lives, but it's not going to be. It's temporary. So get help and change.
Great. Thank you. Love it. Okay. Thank you so much, Maeve, for taking the time to be here. It's been great. Once again, people can find you on Instagram at Becoming Maeve, and your book Becoming Maeve will be available, on August 15th. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation and if you would like to hear more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and spread the word. You can find all the information about this podcast and my activities as a writer on my website, hamilljonathan.com. All these conversations are available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you, Maeve. Thank you,
Thank
everyone,
you for
and see
having
you
me.
soon. You're welcome. Thank you soon. Bye bye.